Hey everyone, good evening. Brian here from LCS, and we're here tonight to talk with a collector who's been collecting for a lot longer than me. I can tell you that. So, Bob Pretel is a Guinness World Record holder due to his comic book collection. So, we're going to bring Bob on and pick his brain about all things comics and collecting. So, let me bring on Bob. Hey,
Hello,
Bob. How are you?
doing good.
Thanks for being on the channel and agreeing to let me pick your brain about comic books.
No problem. I love talking about comics. You get
Yes.
me started, it's hard to get me to stop.
Well, I've seen. I did a little homework. I know you were recently featured on Forbes, so I started to look around and found a lot of different information. You talking about your collection and the hobby. So it was definitely interesting. And when I saw that, I said, oh, let me reach out and see if he'd be willing to do an interview. And you were. So I really appreciate that. So
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Every couple of years, someone notices me and I do a whole bunch of interviews with different things, and then it like kind of dies down for a while.
okay, yeah. Well, comics, the last couple of years have been pretty. There's been a lot of focus on collecting and comic books in general. So, but why don't we just start with tell us a little bit about how long you've been collecting and how you got into collecting.
Sure, I've been collecting since 1970, and it really started kind of a interesting way because there were always comics around my house. I have two older brothers who are quite a lot older than me. They're like 8 and 10 years older than me. So there were always comics around the house. There was like Richie Rich and Batman and just, various different kinds of. I remember reading all kinds of like Harvey comics when I was little and Uncle Scrooge and,
Okay.
just things like that. But then they also had some superhero comics, and I think what it was my brother was like sick of me touching his superhero comics. So he uh, he got me made a coupon for me for my birthday when I was 8, and it was like good for 10 comics. Comics at
Okay.
that time were 15 cents, and it was like the deal was if I went to the store and bought a comic and came back to him with the coupon and showed him the coupon and the comic I bought, then he'd give me the 15 cents back.
Okay.
So, that was how I started collecting. I had always just kind of read their comics. So I went, and the first one I bought for myself was Amazing Spider-Man 88 um, in the summer of 1970. And that was it for me. I fell in love with it. It was Stan Lee wrote it, and John Romita Sr. was the artist, and it kind of ended on a bit of a cliffhanger, and I came back for number 89, and I came back for number 90, and I've been coming back every single month since.
Yeah, Spider-Man is one of my favorite characters, and I think there's a lot of collectors and just people in obviously people in general that are Spider-Man. Obviously one of the more popular characters.
Yeah,
So
I like, that was an advantage for me, like Marvel, because one thing I don't always say is that same month that I bought Amazing Spider-Man 88, I also bought a Batman comic, because when I look back at like old Batman comics and I remember buying this, it came out the same month as the Amazing Spider-Man 88, and it was by Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams. So it's not
oh
like
wow.
it was like some weak Batman comic, right? But it was like a real, and in since, I mean, I love that stuff. But when I was 8, boy, I came back for Spider-Man, but I had pretty much no interest in coming back for the next issue of Batman.
Oh wow. Okay.
So
Yeah,
it's just something.
Batman was one of my favorite characters growing up as a kid, but I think it was because not so much of comics, it was because of the Adam West
Yeah,
TV show, right? So
I
I
loved
was catching
watching the
that on
TV show.
reruns
Yeah,
and yeah,
yeah, I
yeah. So
loved watching that.
yeah. So do your brothers are they as big of a collectors as you
No,
are? No.
they, in fact, they're like most people who collect. Because again, like I was 8, so they would have been in like high school at that point, right?
Okay.
And they had girlfriends and they were going to college. So like pretty much right when my brother was kind of getting me into reading comics, he was pretty much abandoning them, never to look back.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of like the only one in the
Okay.
family.
And, so we talked about Spider-Man, we talked about Batman. I see you have a Flash hat on. So what are your favorites? Or is it Marvel, DC, Independent?
I'm
What's your...
I like a little bit of everything. I started out obviously. I loved Marvel, and I think what spawned that term Marvel zombie when I was, probably 8 to 12, 8 to 13. I would buy anything with a Marvel logo on it at the, off the spinner rack. I was buying, Kid Colt Outlaw and Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos and, you know, just whatever. If it had a Marvel logo on it, I'd
Right.
buy it. And I really didn't buy a lot of DC stuff. I would every now and again I'd pick up a DC comic. I remember picking up a Justice League comic that I really liked. That it was, I think it was number 85 or 88. It was a giant size one that was reprinting 2 issues of Justice League. It had like the fantastic fingers of Felix Faust. If you remember that story, with he had his fingers up and all Justice League members were on his fingers.
Okay.
And then there was the 3 demons, Abnegazar, Wrath, and Gast. I still remember that. That was a giant size comic that would have been a quarter, I think, at the time, that reprinted those. And I liked that, but I didn't really come back. Again, I bought that 1 issue and I was kind of good.
Right.
So I read Marvel. The thing that got me into DC was at Marvel in the 70s. Marvel had a lot of interesting comics in the 70s. I was reading Conan the Barbarian, a character that most people are maybe familiar with, but he's not like that popular. And now Shang-Chi, who now is super popular because he's got a movie that was like a hit a month ago. But before a month ago, I guarantee you, like most people had no idea who Shang-Chi is. I loved the Master of Kung Fu comic back when it was coming out. I loved Tomb of Dracula, Werewolf by Night, Deathlock in Astonishing Tales, I believe it was, and Amazing Adventures had Killraven. And I was reading Black Panther and Jungle Action. So I was reading a lot of like kind of fringe stuff, right? But I really liked fantasy, and that kind of led me. I give Marvel credit for getting me into indie comics, because at some point Marvel pulled back from a lot of that more interest, not more interesting, but it was stuff that was catching my imagination, and they started dropping and canceling a lot of these, Killraven and Deathlock and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Some of the fringe
right,
books.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
And around that same time, a lot of indie books were starting up in the early 80s from publishers like Pacific and First Comics and Eclipse and all of that. So I kind of rolled into, Star Slayer and what are some of the others? Grimjack, American Flag. I don't know if you've heard of any of these or
Yeah,
not.
no,
But
I have. American Flag. Yeah.
there's a lot of really great indie stuff by like really, of the time, top-notch creators. But I really liked sword and sorcery stuff, from the Conan and, like that. So the one DC book at the time that caught my eye was Warlord by Mike Grell. And I was reading Warlord, and I liked that. And then as it turned out, Mike Grell was also the artist on Green Lantern, Green Arrow, when that came back after there was a little hiatus after the Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams run. It was not being published for a while. Like, I don't remember exactly how long. Maybe it was 6 months, maybe it was a year. But there was a gap in time. But then Grell was doing that. And then Grell was also doing Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes. So it's like all these things. It's like, you look back, like on the Marvel side, Gene Colan, the guy was doing Daredevil, he was doing Iron Man. It's like these guys were doing 2 or 3 books a month. Nowadays, like artists, they can barely do 1 book a month. Maybe they have to do it
Yeah,
one
that's
every
true.
other month or something. And these guys were like, just, hey, I got to feed my family. How many books can I put out? You know, so I started reading DC, and then once I kind of got into DC, I kind of dived into DC with both feet, and I was pretty much soon reading most of the DC stuff. I was reading most of the Marvel stuff. I was reading a giant pile of indie stuff, like Grendel, ElfQuest, Elementals, it's like you name it. And it's like whatever was coming out from those guys, I would kind of look at it, because around that time, I guess it was like maybe 1978. So I was 16. So when I was 16, two things happened. One, a comic book store opened near my
Okay.
house that was not like it was like if I get on my bike, I could ride there in 10 minutes.
Yeah, okay.
And, so it was fairly close. And I see a comment there. I loved Jonah Hex. That was another good one. That was a DC that I really liked. Looking at a comment that's down on the live stream.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
Yep.
but so I had the comic shop, and they got like way more stuff and more reliably than I used to go to, like the 7-Eleven and a
Right.
couple of different grocery stores and a couple in California. I grew up in California. There were liquor stores. We called them liquor stores. They sold liquor, but they were really like convenience stores.
Right. Okay.
I would go back to visit family sometimes in the summer in Chicago, and I would say I want to go to the liquor store, and they would look at me funny, because I guess in Illinois, liquor stores only sold liquor, and they're
Right.
like, "What
Right.
does this 12-year-old kid want to go to the liquor store for?" I wanted some comic books, so I had to go to, like, I guess there was a White Hand. It was like a convenience store that I would go to when I was
Okay.
on vacation back there. But anyway, so this comic shop opened, plus I got my driver's license when I was 15 and a half. So that opened up a wide variety. I would go to, like, I found comic shops like all over the place that were like, 10, 15, 20 miles away, that I could just drive to, that it wasn't feasible for me to go to these places, when I was just on a bike,
Right.
you
Right.
know. So it really opened up like the amount of different stuff that I could read. So I was able to then just pull out. And I think a lot of people, like, I, I still read superhero comics, right? But I don't read that many superhero comics,
Yeah.
because at a certain point, the same things just happen over and over again. I mean, they're
Right.
kind of incentivized not to fundamentally change the status quo. At least that was the way it was for many, many years. And they'd kind of retell the same stories, but then nothing would happen. Now, which is almost worse, they do stuff where a new writer or artist will come in, they'll do something fundamentally different, and then they just, as soon as that writer goes away, the next writer completely undoes it and
Right.
like does
Yeah.
something else.
Revising
And it's like,
history.
oh,
Yeah.
never mind, let's, like, they retcon some crazy thing. And, it's just like, how many death of stories do we get every year? And how often do those people stay dead? And the answer is they never stay dead.
Right.
Okay. It's just, they're just coming back all the time. It's just, how interesting a way are they going to have these guys come back to life? I got tired of it. It's like, come up with something original. I don't care how original your way of bringing Doctor Strange back to life is going to be after this death of Doctor Strange story they're telling right now. I don't care.
Right.
It just,
Yeah, I think
and
that's where the independent publishers kind of have the advantage, because they're kind of pushing the boundaries on the storylines, and they don't have the 50, 60-year history of characters, so they can do a little bit more, take more chances, with their stories.
that's right. And, that's, it also kind of segues into another question that people ask me all the time, which is, boy, if you read like 100 to 120 comic books a month, how do you keep all those stories straight?
Right.
And my answer is, if they were all superhero comics, there's no way I would be able to keep 120 superhero comics straight in my head, because these things just kind of like, to me anyway, they blur together.
Right.
So, the fact that I'm reading, just this sci-fi book over here and this noir book and this other one that's some other, they're like all so different that I can fairly easily just kind of context switch between the different stories. And the other thing there's like a handful of books that I'll like pretty much every month. I just read them when they come in, because they're like my total favorites. But then other ones I'll usually let kind of build up until I get like 6 or 7
Right. And then able
issues,
to
and
read
then I'll
this.
just
Yeah.
kind of read them in a row. I'll read like maybe a whole story arc at once, which that's essentially like reading a trade paperback, but I still like reading the individual issues more than I like picking up a trade paperback and reading the trade paperback.
Yeah, I do the same with some stories. Like you said, I'll wait, 4 or 5 issues, 6 issues, and then read it. And I think that's better, kind of doing that in all one sitting or over, a couple days.
Right.
I think you retain the story information a little bit better than,
Yeah.
chucking it up every, once a month.
It also tends to make at least for me, I read them a little bit faster, because I'm not like sitting there trying to remember what the heck was going on. So
Right.
it's like, once I'm into it, I just kind of get with the flow, and I kind of just go through, and I can read, like 6 issues in an hour.
Right. Right. So what are some of your, we talked a little bit about Spider-Man and some of the DC characters, but what are your, what are your favorite characters?
Um, I like Spider-Man. For some reason, because he's the first one, so he's always got a soft spot. I got a soft spot for him. But that said, I do not unreservedly like Spider-Man. I stopped reading Spider-Man altogether when J. Michael Straczynski was writing him, and like decided he was going to retcon it where Gwen Stacy got pregnant from Norman Osborn, and
Right.
like just a bunch of other, like, nope, I'm out.
Yeah.
It's just like, so I mean, there is some, I don't have like a 100% love. And then the other part is I was like a completist, right? So it's like, oh, I've got every issue of Spider-Man. But then when they started restarting every series at issue number 1, and they'd run it from, from a new volume, which Spider-Man's volumes 5, 6, 7 now.
5, yeah, 5, I think, yeah.
They just keep restarting these books until, of course, it's going to be a 600 issue or something, and then they go back to legacy numbering, so they can put a 600 on the cover and sell 10 variant covers of it. And it's like,
Right, yeah.
It doesn't sit
Well,
well with
they
me.
just did that with the recent issue 74 of the current run of volume 5. It was 875.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're bringing Ben Reilly back, and I'm like, I never really liked Ben Reilly, so
Yeah,
I'm ready
Clone
to pretty
Saga
much.
has a very special place in a lot of people's.
It's just like an age thing, right? I mean, and I don't, people like what they like. I try really hard, and I fail sometimes, to not say something's bad that I don't like. That's a real pet peeve of mine with the internet in general, is that when somebody doesn't like something, it becomes, that was bad. It was the most terrible thing that I ever read, or, this or that. Or they say the same thing about movies and TV shows. It's like, let's put some context on this. You might not have liked it, but it's like, I didn't like the Clone Saga. I don't really like Venom and Carnage, but that doesn't mean that they're bad. And it doesn't mean, I mean, they're like, objectively, I like Todd McFarlane's art. I can look
Right.
at, and I can appreciate the craftsmanship that goes into something, while at the same time not liking it. So,
Right. Yeah, no, it may
yeah.
not be for you. I mean, I recently got back into reading the current run of Spider-Man, and I had taken a hiatus for a long period of time, and it was reading it again. I'm like, wow, he's still having the same problems with rent and holding a job
Yeah.
and family and friends, and it's just like, you think at some point he would have learned a little bit more and maybe advanced his story, but that's Spider-Man, right? Everybody knows him
Well,
as a
They
down on his
switched
luck
it up.
type
They
character.
switched it up for a while there when they made him like the CEO of Parker
Right.
Industries in the
Right.
last volume, and but then that all blew up in his face, and it's like I guess they always have to like just slap poor Peter Parker down and say, okay, you schmo, you're gonna get back to your roots and be the put upon guy again. And it's like I
Right.
feel bad for him sometimes. But
So what
beyond
about what
beyond
about?
Spider-Man, let me just
Oh,
so
sure,
like
sure.
I liked various characters. Like I liked Captain America. In the Avengers, I loved Vision and the Scarlet Witch. Like when I started reading Avengers, so around issue 106 of Volume One, and Iron Man was in it, Cap was in it, Vision and Scarlet Witch were on the team at that time. I always just kind of resonated with them. So I was reading it like as a kid for that first time when Vision and Wanda got married,
Okay.
and like all this kind of stuff. So I like those. And when I went to DC, I kind of gravitated to the kind of second tier, not Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman, but I really liked Flash and Green Lantern. They
Okay.
were my favorite guys at DC. And then beyond DC, there's just a tremendous number of kind of independent things that I like. Like I've always liked Conan. And while they make some comics of it, they're not mostly known for comics. But my two of my all-time favorite characters are James Bond. Looking forward to Friday of this
Oh
week
yeah.
here
Yeah.
in
The
the
new.
U.S. The people in
Yeah. New
Europe have
movie
already
looks good.
got the new movie. And Doc Savage. I love Doc Savage, and I've read all the pulp novels, 181 of them
Oh
of
wow.
Doc Savage. And there's a bunch of Doc Savage comics out there, but I like him, and just I like creators more now. It's just more like I will follow creators, and most creators that I like, I'll get almost anything that they write, um, that kind of sight unseen, because I pre-order my comics, so I'm not like chasing down to the shop and like, ooh, did I get it before somebody else got it? It's like I
Right.
put it in an order, and they're all mine are there, right?
Yeah.
So
That's the one good thing about the internet, right? You can plan ahead now with your
yes,
with your
I
comics.
know what's coming out. I read the previews catalog every month, and I know what's coming out, and I order stuff like 2 months in advance of when it comes out. That works against me sometimes, because sometimes I've ordered a couple of issues of something, and I read the first issue, and I'm like, wow, I really don't like that. But I'm getting a few issues of it anyway because I've already ordered them before I read it. So
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned, following creators. So, who are some of your, favorite artists or writers?
okay, I let's see. I could probably break that into a couple of categories, and it's going to be kind of all time, right? So
Okay.
not just like current guys. There's some current guys mixed in. Like, so I'll start with the guys who do everything. They're writer artists. They write and draw the comics, right? So Terry Moore. I love Strangers in Paradise, and then he did Echo and Rachel Rising, and he's got a current series out called Serial. He does those through his own company. I love Stan Sakai, who does Usagi Yojimbo. I love Jeff Smith and Bone. I love Dave Sim and Cerebus. Howard Chaykin has done a number of things that he writes and draws, from the American flag way back in the 80s to currently he's doing a series called Hey Kids Comics. It's kind of a sideways expose, kind of satire on the comic book industry. If you read it, it's kind of like you can kind of figure out who these people are that he's got as
That's interesting. I
characters
haven't
in
heard
the
that. Yeah, I heard that
it's
series. Yeah.
in like the last issue of the second series. So I think it ran 6 issues, then he took a break, and then there was another 6 issues, and number 6 of the second one's coming out tomorrow,
Oh, okay.
which would be Wednesday, October 6th. And then Carl Barks. I love Carl Barks. Like mostly the Disney stuff I collect is like I get stuff by Carl Barks. I love his Uncle Scrooge and Donald Duck. I love Sergio Aragonis and his Gru. Will Eisner's Spirit. And then I should probably move into superheroes. I'm talking about non-superhero stuff, but Walt Simonson. Love Walt Simonson. His Thor, Manhunter, all kinds of stuff that Walt Simonson has done. John Byrne, his FF run is one of my favorite FF runs after the Lee Kirby FF run, probably second place for me. And then the Matt Fraction one probably will take number 3 for me on FF. Matt Wagner created Grendel, did Mage. He's written a lot of other, he's just been a writer on a lot of other things, but his writing and drawing together, love it. I talked about Mike Grell before on Warlords, one of the guys who got me into DC. Jim Starlin, a lot of people know as creating Thanos and Warlock, and did that kind of definitive run on Captain Marvel, the first one, Marvel. He went into indie stuff and did an awesome series called Dreadstar. The Luna Brothers, I don't know if you're familiar with them. They've written Jonathan and Joshua Luna. Joshua mostly does the scripts. I think Joshua does the art. Maybe Jonathan does the scripts. I get them mixed up, but there's 2 of them. And they did this series called The Sword, which is one of my favorite kind of graphic novel. It was a series, right? So I have a pet peeve about calling a comic book series a graphic novel. There are things that are written as a graphic novel, but this was a comic book series, ran 20 some issues. It's about this girl, and she finds this sword, and it makes her kind of invulnerable and gives her powers. And just like people want to get the sword, and then they did another one called Girls. It's just amazing stuff. And then I like the Hernandez brothers, Love and Rockets, may have heard of. So Jaime and Gilbert, and they've done stuff like they have different stories set in that, like Heartbreak Soup, and just lots of characters. And the fun part about the Hernandez stuff is the characters have kind of aged over the last 30 some odd years that I've been reading these comics. The characters are kind of progressing along.
Wow. Yeah, that normally doesn't happen in comics.
Yeah, doesn't happen a lot. So those are the writer artists. They kind of do their own thing, and a lot of that stuff's creator owned that they did. Writers, Stan Lee. Got to give the guy credit. He's the one. If I wouldn't have read that Stan Lee Spider-Man comic, I would not be reading comics today, probably. Mark Waid, Neil Gaiman, the great Marv Wolfman, Crisis on Infinite Earths, created Blade, wrote Tomb of Dracula, which was one of my favorite Marvel books back in the day. That guy's awesome. Robert Kirkman, love Kirkman. Alan Moore, Denny O'Neil. Some of my favorite Batman stuff is by Denny O'Neil. Don McGregor, who wrote a lot of stuff at Marvel, but he did that kind of definitive Black Panther run, the Panther's Rage, that like a lot of the core elements of Wakanda from the movie that people are familiar with are things that were created by Don McGregor. And he also wrote Killraven that I loved when I was a kid.
Okay.
Brian K. Vaughan. Well, that guy's written some amazing stuff. He's written for Vertigo, like Ex Machina. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Yeah.
He did Runaways. He wrote the amazing indie book Saga with Fiona Staples. That's like when they're taking a hiatus for the last few years on that series, but that was like on like the #1 best comic in the world list for a number of years while that was running. Warren Ellis, Greg Rucka, Garth Ennis. It's kind of like a, who's who of, like popular writers, but I mean, they're popular because they write a lot of really good stuff. Matt Fraction, I mentioned, Cullen Bunn. He does a lot of amazing horror stuff. He's done some superhero stuff that I'm not that enthused about, but boy, if you've ever heard of his Harrow County stuff from Vapor Master, you've clearly not read modern day comics, Vapor Master. Or you have like a really narrow definition of what a good comic is. So I mean, there's just amazing stuff being done out. It kind of distinguishes me also, is that I never stopped reading comics. And I know a lot of collectors have Vapor Master's opinion that fill in the blank for the year, but it's like no good comic has been made after 19XX, you know, or something. And they just think that there are no good comics. And, you know, comics are like everything. You know, like Sturgeon's Law. I don't remember the something like 80% or 90% of everything is crud. You know, it's just there's just yeah, you know, there's a lot of garbage out there, but there's also some really amazing stuff. And you know, personally, if I only read popular superhero comics and that was my vision of what comics was, I would probably be of a similar opinion that there's not that many great modern comics, although there have been some fairly amazing in and amongst. I mean, you got to realize, I mean, Marvel and DC each crank out somewhere between 70 and 120 titles every month, right? And 10 or 15 of those are awesome.
Right. Yeah.
Now, how many of those are left over, right? And what I would consider to be the awesome ones are not necessarily the best-selling ones either. So,
yeah,
I
think like yeah, they aren't the main the the tier one characters because like those characters have such a long history that I don't think they take chances with those storylines, and I think that's where some of the independent stories over the last couple of years are really starting to gain some momentum because of the writing and the chances they're taking within within the stories.
I tend to like the B and C list books that come out from Marvel way more than, you know, kind of like the A list characters. I mean, like Avengers, nah, I don't read Avengers, you know, but there's been some really great Daredevil storylines in the last 10 years, you know.
Yeah, I know. I've heard good things about the current run of Daredevil.
Yeah,
as well.
the current run's pretty good. Bendis did a really awesome run. Ed Brubaker did a really good run on Daredevil. You know, but then, you know, there are creators that I like. Old man, good shout out. Night Force by Marv Wolfman. That was an awesome series. And it was Marv teamed up again with the awesome artist Gene Colan, who worked with him on Tomb of Dracula over at DC. That you can find in a dollar bin, and it is awesome. So if anybody wants an awesome 80s comic, go look for Night Force by Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan. But, you know, there are creators who I absolutely love their indie stuff, like Rick Remender. Love the guy's indie stuff. He's written some amazing indie stuff like Strange Girl, and I'm drawing a blank on some of the others, but he's written a lot of books that I just loved. But then he comes over and he's doing superheroes for Marvel. They don't do anything for me.
Right.
You know, Bendis, I loved when he was creating new stuff at Marvel. When he created Jessica Jones, some of that Jessica Jones stuff with David Mack doing the art, and you know, it's just amazing. And then he goes to DC, and I didn't like anything he did at DC, except he has his own kind of separate line of kind of creator-owned books that he had at Marvel. He was doing an imprint called Icon, I think it was, and he had a separate imprint at DC where he was doing some creator-owned books. I like a lot of those, but going on to Superman and kind of rewriting the reason Krypton exploded and destroying the bottle city of Kandor and doing other kinds of stuff that somebody else is going to undo down the line. You know, I can take it. I can leave that. I won't even say I can take or leave it. I can just leave it.
Right.
I don't.
Yeah,
I don't care for that stuff.
You know, that's the problem with some of the larger titles, right? They're trying to keep it very middle of the road and keep your average reader happy. Where some, like you said, some of the lower tier characters might be the better storyline or better read. So
what's interesting though is like some of these writers, they come in and they do fairly major stuff on like big characters like Superman, like changing the fact that Krypton didn't just blow up, but some dude actually came and blew up Krypton, and then making him like the new big bad guy in Superman, that's pretty major, right? It's just like, that's a huge retcon. But to me, that's a retcon that did not need to be made, and it will probably be conveniently forgotten at some point.
Or undone at
so it's
some
just
point,
like, why do you do this? Anyway. So talked about writers, talked about writer artists. Gene Colan, I mentioned. Love Gene Colan. John Romita Sr., Alex Ross. Love Alex Ross.
Yeah.
He mostly does covers now. I will almost buy a book just because it's got an Alex Ross cover, although he does so many covers that I kind of don't buy every book he does a cover for, just because he'll do some covers on some dynamite books that I got zero interest in getting.
Yeah, I mean, I love just looking at his stuff like on Instagram.
I follow him on Instagram, and he posts this amazing stuff. Jim Aparo, he was another one. Like, he did Batman for a long time, and Brave and the Bold, and Batman and Detective. He did art in all those. He did a great run of Aquaman in Adventure Comics, but he's a great kind of all-time great guy. Bob Layton, awesome run on Iron Man. He's done a lot of other stuff. He did a couple of really great Hercules miniseries back in the 80s. John Buscema, I love. Conan, right? He was my Conan artist. It wasn't Barry Windsor Smith for me. I came on to Conan probably in the late 20s of his first run. So it was after Barry Smith had left, and Buscema had like this big burly Conan, whereas the Barry Windsor Smith was much more lean. That wasn't kind of the same, it's not my Conan. It's the same way my Spider-Man is John Romita Sr. Spider-Man. And I can appreciate a Steve Ditko Spider-Man kind of for its historic value, but the skinny little Spider-Man is just not my Spider-Man. And that's sacrilege for people who love Steve Ditko. I like Steve Ditko a lot more on Doctor Strange, because he just does the weird so well on that. Other ones, maybe some more current guys on art. Frank Cho, David Mack, Darwin Cook, Bill Sienkiewicz, not completely new. J.H. Williams, he did Promethea. He was the guy who created Batwoman with Greg Rucka. And just like, he does these amazing page layouts that your eye can follow the story, but they're just so interesting and unique. I love that guy. He's just like really, does amazing stuff with page layouts. Bernie Wrightson, Joe Kubert, P. Craig Russell, Wally Wood. I could name artists I love, as long as you want to sit here and listen to me talk about.
Well, you mentioned McFarlane, Todd. What do you think about Todd's art?
He's not. It's okay. He's not one of my, like, if I was making a list of favorite artists, he would be not in my top 50. But somebody else, art is so subjective, and it's the same between writing and drawing art, right? Art is just a subjective thing. Two different people can look at the same exact piece of art, whether it be a comic book, a painting, a TV show, a movie, a prose novel, and one person will think it's the greatest thing they ever experienced, and another person thinks it's just an utter piece of garbage. And it's so weird. I mean, I go see a lot of movies, and I'll see a movie and I'll say, that was an okay movie, and then like I'll go on Facebook and there's like a zillion people talking about how this was the biggest piece of crap they've ever had inflicted on them. And then there's another group of people talking about how this was an amazing thing, that it was the best thing they ever saw. And I'm like, it's okay.
Yeah, very subjective.
So it's just, I like, I think anybody, you like what you like. And that's kind of like when I talk to people about collecting, they say, how do you, it's like, collect what you like, collect what makes you happy. And if what makes you happy is some people, I go to the comic shop every Wednesday when I can. Most Wednesdays I'm at the comic shop. And as I work from home now, I'm doing consulting and I can usually schedule my meetings around so I can like just have a gap so I can go to the comic shop around when they open. I'm kind of privileged that way at this point in my life that I don't have to like punch a clock and be, somewhere. And I'm always seeing people. It's just like, they're like, give me one of each cover. I want all these different variant covers of this thing. And that makes them happy. I don't do that. I pick the one that I like the best generally, and that's fine for me. I will make exceptions. I won't say that I never buy variant covers. There was I don't know if you go to the comic shop that often, like
I'm
a few
pretty much
months
there every
back,
Wednesday too.
they did those Alex Ross timeless covers.
Oh yes, yeah.
You remember those? Where they're just like these iconic, kind of virgin covers with like the torso of like these Marvel heroes. I bought all of those, and it's like,
that's a good set to have.
And I put them on my spinner rack. I don't know if you can see my spinner rack is over there.
Yeah.
But I bought all of those as they came out, and for like a series that I was already collecting, like Spider-Man, I was buying Amazing Spider-Man. So I got the A cover because that's usually what I collect. But then I also got the Alex Ross cover because I wanted that for my spinner rack. I didn't just get the Alex Ross cover on that one. But if it was a series that I wasn't collecting, then I just got the Alex Ross cover.
Right.
And to War Machine's point coming on here, yes, one of each cover can be extremely expensive. And that's why I don't do it. And that's why I'm amazed because like somebody will go in and they buy like, and even like not just regular covers. I mean, these guys are buying the chase covers. Like terminology wise, I use the term chase cover for anything that's like a 1 in 10, 1 in 25, 1 in 50, whatever, versus ones that just, they have their own diamond code and the shop can order however many they want of like the A or B cover, for instance. Like DC, pretty much every title, they put out an A cover and then a B cover that costs an extra $1 because it's on card stock and it's kind of it doesn't have it has a very small logo on it and stuff. Well, I mean, those are variant covers, but they're not chase covers. But then they also do, some books that, it's like, okay, your retailer can order one of these for every 50 copies. So of course, retailers are going to sell that book for $50 or something. They're not going to sell it for cover price. So boy, the people who collect that, again, I don't knock them if it's making them happy to collect all these different variant covers. Hey, that's what collecting's all about. It's about making you happy. But boy, they can spend a lot of money. They can spend a couple of $100 probably just buying, 3 or 4 different titles. Or not even, probably just 2 titles. If you bought all the variant covers, you could probably drop $100. Well, if I'm going to spend $100, I would rather get 20 different comics. That's just
than a single exclusive.
Yeah.
But I mean, and that was, I started collecting in the 80s. And, that was back then there were no really variant covers.
No.
There were 12 issues a year. They weren't publishing multiple times per month. So, I could, buy Amazing Spider-Man and it was 12 issues, throughout the year. Today, they're just this month, they're kicking off publishing Spider-Man 3 times a month.
Yes, I saw that. And I'm actually jumping off Spider-Man right now. Like the 75 is my last issue of Spider-Man for a while. I just don't want to buy and try to read 3 issues of Spider-Man every month. It's just it's too much for me.
I mean, I can only think that they're doing it for kind of money reasons because the current storyline or the recent storyline has been kind of mixed reviews, and now to increase the frequency, I know they're bringing on a new team, but still to have increased issues, I don't know if that's the right way to go, but we'll see what happens.
These certain things that they tend to work, and they work, so they keep doing them. It's like if they put out 3, copies of, 3 covers or 5 covers, somebody in marketing is sitting there noticing that when we put out 3 covers, our total sales go up by this amount. And we have to pay some artist like this much to draw the extra covers. And, it comes down to dollars and cents, right? It's just, if comic shops keep ordering them,
and we keep
the
buying them.
publishers will keep, well, it's kind of a two-phase thing, right? And one's going to be a leading indicator of the other, right? The comic shops keep ordering multiple variant covers, so the publishers keep cranking them out. Now, at some point, if the fans just stop buying them, there's going to be comic shops that are going to go out of business because they sunk a lot of money into variant covers that suddenly the demand just dried up for. And it's not the publisher that's going to suffer directly right at that minute, but there will be some comic shops that go out of business.
Right.
And that's just it. But until that happens, what would their incentive be to stop doing tons of variant covers? It makes them more money. They're going to keep doing it.
Right.
And I think kind of through a side channel, these hot comic sites and hot comics apps are helping perpetuate this, because I just all the time see like people come in and, oh, do you have this variant? This is supposed to be the variant that's hot, and it's selling on eBay for $50 the day that it came out. And I'm like, there is no comic book that legitimately should be selling for $50 the day that it comes out. It's complete speculation. You've been collecting since the 80s. Remember Daredevil's armor?
Yes. Okay.
That was a hot comic in like the 90s when it came out. I remember seeing that comic book selling for $20 because it just came out and it was popular.
Right.
And who even heard of that anymore? I'm sure that's a $5 comic now.
It's interesting because I was in an LCS recently looking for some issues, and a store that I don't shop at too frequently, but it was the week that the new Moon Knight came out, and it was Moon Knight issue number 3. They didn't have any on the shelf, but they had one up already bagged and boarded selling for $20 because there's a first appearance in that. And it was like Friday or Saturday of the week, and the book premiered on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And it was already selling at this particular shop for $20.
I tend to not go to, like, if I see a shop doing that, I will not frequent that shop.
Right. Yeah.
What my LCS does, which I like, is when something like that happens and there's like some first appearance that some hot comic site said, ooh, hot first appearance. And it's like, how many first appearances are there in comics? I mean, and like 90% of them amount to nothing. I like taking another example from recent memory. Remember the Joker's daughter? Not the one from way back when, but the one when during face cut off Joker days, about 5, 6, 7 years ago in the New 52. Remember when Joker's daughter was hot and they were selling the first appearance of Joker's daughter, and it was like all these were really expensive. It's supply and demand. There was a demand driven by hype. Now nobody cares. So those are not particularly expensive anymore. The current one that exact same thing I predict is going to happen to is Punchline. First appearance of Punchline. It was like, ooh, first appearance, Joker's got to do sidekick, Punchline. And it's like, chances are Punchline is not going to be the next Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn is still going to be Harley Quinn. It's not like, so it's like people who do play the short game on these variants, who like get them relatively cheap and then flip them almost immediately to some sucker. For like, the person who's paying the $50 is the person who's going to get totally taken advantage of in this scenario.
Sure. Yeah. They'll be the ones that get burnt. Yeah.
Yeah. The people who, because there's going to be local maximums on these things. And at some point they're going to drop down. I mean, that I just don't see, and it's not like every one of them, right? It's like 1 out of 100 might actually hit, right? But the amount of money you spend on the other 99 of them is going to wash away the profit you make from the one that hit if you're paying lots of money for them. So it's like my policy is like never buy new comics that have an inflated price associated with them. And I don't chase hot comics, although I frequently get a hot comic because I pre-ordered it, So it's like I was buying Moon Knight, so I pre-ordered Moon Knight. So I walked into the shop and Moon Knight #3 was there for me, It's just like, it's not like I'm not going to get Moon Knight #3 because I'm reading it. But what my shop owner does is when a issue hits one of those hot comic sites, he knows because the phone starts ringing the day before asking, "Oh, do you have, this book?" So he'll know that something's going to have a run on it. And what he'll do is he won't put it on the rack. He'll just take it off, and any of the regulars who come in that buy comics every single week, he'll sell it to us at cover price if we want one. And any of these people who have never been in the shop before and are just coming in because they saw that this is the next hot thing that's going to be worth money, well, we just don't have it, is what they get told.
Yeah, he's taking care of his regulars, which is good. Yeah.
And it's nice not like letting someone come in who just wants to make a quick buck, because he knows that the people who are ordering that thing are typically ordering it because they want to read it. Even if they're going to read it and then turn around and say, well, if somebody's willing to pay $50 for it, I'll sell it on eBay. It's like, I have not done that to date, but I will tell you, I have been mightily tempted sometimes to sell some things that, just like crazy dollars.
Easy money, right?
Yeah. But,
So what about let's talk a little bit about the Guinness world record here for the largest comic book collection. So how did that all come about?
Okay. So I was on, this was probably over 10 years ago. I was on like a message board. There was a podcast way back in the early days of podcasts before they're all being done by celebrities and people now, not present company excluded, but there's a lot of podcasts now.
Oh yes. Yeah.
There was a podcast called Comic Geek Speak that's still going. It's got hundreds and hundreds of episodes out there. And I used to listen to that podcast, and they had a forum. And we would chat about comics on the forum and stuff. Anyway, somebody posted a thing up about some world record largest comic book collection. And it was some guy who had like 65,000 comics, and he was in Australia. And he had 65,000 comics. And I was like, I looked at that and I clicked on the link and I went and I looked at it. And I've got to have more than 65,000 comic books. I don't know how many I have. I'm going to have to count them, and I had them in a database, and it didn't give like an easy count. So I had to like export it to an Excel sheet and look at how many rows are in the Excel sheet. I ended up having like something like 100,000 comics, right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
In my Excel sheet. But then, so I'm like, wow, okay, let me look at this. Let me go see if I can apply for this. So I go to the Guinness, but this guy's record wasn't through Guinness. It was through something called the World Record Academy, which is kind of like an Australian version of Guinness, I guess.
Okay.
So I went to Guinness and I said, well, when I think of a world record, I think of the Guinness World Record. I don't think of the World Record Academy. So I went to the Guinness site and I looked and looked and looked, and they didn't have a record for world's largest comic book collection. So I sent in an inquiry and I'm like, hey, you got this Australian organization, they've got a record number, and I've got like half again as many as this guy. Wouldn't it be nice if Guinness had a category? And they had a much larger number in the Guinness thing. And they're like, sure, here's, let us look into what you would need to do and get back to you. And then, month went by, and then I get an email from them with all kinds of rules and things that I would have to do. And they defined a comic book, and it's like, sequential storytelling with words and or pictures. There can be silent comics, but, typically it's words and pictures, but it's not, it is a thing, right? And so they defined what a comic was, but then they also said no duplicates. So, like the people who have like, I got a long box full of X-Men #1 by Jim Lee, 300 of them, or,
Right.
like some comic shop. It's like, hey, here's the other thing. It's like, I don't have the most comic books of anybody. There's a ton of people that have more comic books than me. I have the biggest comic book collection. And the way I distinguish that is I have bought these comic books pretty much one at a time. I mean, I buy 100 at a time, but you know what I mean. It's
Right.
like I'm not buying a collection from somebody and saying, boom, I've got 20,000 more comics than I had yesterday. And, when you buy collections or you buy a store inventory, there's like just tremendous numbers of duplicate comics in there.
Sure.
So no duplicates was one of the rules. And then there were a whole bunch of other hoops I had to jump through. I had to do verification of it. So there were various things I had to do to prove that I had it. I had to have video filmed. I had to do a public event that people were invited to, which I lucked out because I was doing a panel at the Long Beach Comic-Con that year about building a comic book collection.
Oh, okay.
And I handed out flyers and like, hey, come to my house on, this Saturday, and we're going to have we're going to set the Guinness record, and we're going to have pizza and sodas for everybody. And if you come, you can walk away with some free comic books, because guess what? When I deduplicated my collection, I found I had about 6,000 duplicate comic books in.
Oh, wow.
Because I used to buy doubles of stuff, back in the, which actually I probably should have kept some of those, because now they're making movies out of that stuff. So I had like 10 copies of Dazzler #1, which was completely worthless, but it's probably going to be a $5,000 book when they make a Dazzler movie with some hot actress in it, And I'm like, don't. There would have gone my vacation house, So anyway, so I had like probably 8 long boxes of duplicate comics laid out on some tables there, and everybody who came, I was like, take whatever comics you want,
Wow.
And the people walked away with big bags of comics. And I've given away thousands of comics over the years. I used to put boxes together and give them to these charities that send them to military people overseas. They'll read anything. They're bored sitting in Fallujah or some godforsaken desert someplace. It's like whatever kind of stuff you send them that's entertainment, they'll appreciate. So I just I would put together big boxes of comics and donate them and have them sent over. I wouldn't send them directly there, but there was like some local charities that put together boxes of stuff for the troops that I would donate. Yeah. But I also had duplicates just from having like really poor collection management. It'd be like, oh, I'm at this comic shop and there's a 50-cent sale. It's like, oh, buy all these comic books. And it'd be like, I don't remember this comic book from 1980, but as it turns out, I've already got it, when I get home and I go to put it in my database. So it's like, okay, it goes in the duplicates pile. And that still happens, but it happens a little bit less as I'm now getting a little better at that. And I have a new database that I'm transitioning to called Collectors, and it's also the CLZ app on your phone.
Okay. Right. Yeah.
They sync with one another. I put most of my stuff in through the web interface, which is really nice because it stores my data in the cloud, and I can access it from anywhere. So I can use it in a browser on my laptop. I can see it from a browser on my desktop. If I logged in at the computer at your house, we could look at my collection on there.
Right. I can see it from your phone when you're at the dollar bin.
Yeah, I can scan a barcode on a new comic and it'll pop it up and tell me if I have it or not. Well, not any comic that has a barcode, right?
Right. Yeah, I've seen some other collectors using that.
It's pretty awesome. I love it since I've been, but it's just like it's been really time consuming to transition my collection from my old database, which was comic base, into the new one, because it's just the way comics are, with all the different volumes and stuff and all the different variants, what the exact name of a series was in comic base is not necessarily the exact same name that it is in collectors. And what they're calling the B cover of some book is not the same as what's the B cover over here. So I have to like kind of, because some of the stuff I was able to bulk import, using their import. So like most of my old runs, like volume 1 of Spider-Man, Thor, Detective Comics, Flash, I was able, like I got like 50, 60,000 comics in real easy, right? It's just like import, and they all come in and they all link fine, because as you pointed out, up until about 2000, there were not 2 different covers for everything. They weren't restarting every single series every 6 months to a year. There was like one series. It was just like, even if they called it a different name, I just had to figure out the name is this here and it's that there. I'm just going to import it into that one. And then I import 500 issues all in one shot. And it worked really nice. But then I get down to like everything else. It's just like, it's kind of slow going. I have like, what am I at right now? I can look at my other computer here. I have right now 122,159 in the database.
Oh, wow.
And I've got the flat file that I've got sitting here that I'm still importing data from has got about 4,500 rows in it. So I've got another 4,500 that I've got to pull in from there. And then I've got a bunch of short boxes of stuff laying around that's not in the database yet. So I'm figuring by the time I get everything in, from both the database transition plus just stuff like my 2 read piles, about 1,500 books.
Yeah, all the recent stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like in the last year, I've been spending a lot of time on doing the database transition that has taken away from time reading comics.
Right.
So my 2 read pile's been growing, and then I've got, I found in one closet I had, just because I was busy with work, I was reading stuff and not putting it in the database, and I had like 15 short boxes of comics that were not in the database. So those all have to go in.
And how frequently do you update that number with the world record, or is this the effort
time.
right now?
That's what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, right,
Wait until I get it all in this new one. So I have, I think my last record with Guinness is like maybe 103,000. So it's going to jump up. It's like 6 or 7 years out of date. I bought a lot of comics in the last 6 or 7 years. Plus, like I said, I didn't have everything in my old database. There was a lot of stuff that wasn't in that database, and I wasn't as easily able to get like accurate counts of things out of that database as I am out of collectors.
So then once you get this done, it's really going to jump up then. Yeah.
And the other good part of it is I can make a link for them that's a read-only link. So that I can just send Guinness, since it's on the cloud, they can just log in and look at my collection.
Right.
And they can do the count, and they've got a find duplicates in collection feature in collectors.
Okay.
And I run that, and I don't have any duplicates in my collection.
Good.
Although when I ran it today, I did have duplicates, and that was because there's a bug that I put in a ticket that they're going to fix. They're really good on fixing things. Usually I put in a help ticket with them and they fix it within a day or two. But like what it was is there's a series called the Crusaders, you may have heard of. That's a superhero title. And there's multiple versions of it. There was a version from Archie Comics. DC did a version of it in their Impact title. But then there's also a book called The Crusaders that was done by Chick Publications. Jack Chick, who used to do those religious screeds called Chick Tracts. I don't know if you've ever heard of those. They're pretty wild. No. Anyway, it's hyper religious, but I don't want to tease anybody who's like super religious, but I mean, they're hilarious to me because I'm not like that religious. I mean, just like Satan's coming in and saying, if you don't do this, you're going to go to hell. And we're going to poke little devils poking people with pitchforks and stuff. It's like real fire and brimstone stuff.
Okay.
So I discovered these, and I've been like buying them just to read because they're entertaining to me.
Okay.
I'm not like oh, I better stop doing this or I'll go to hell. I probably will but it's just, there's some stuff that's pretty crazy in these things. Very extreme. Anyway, there's these two series, both called just the Crusaders. So it's seeing them as duplicates of one another. I've got issue 1 and 5 of this Jack 1 and issue number 5 of the Jack Chick one. And I have all the issues of the DC Impact one. So it's saying, oh, these are duplicates, but they're not actually duplicates.
Right. So they got to break it out.
They just have to name one of them the Crusaders, paren, Chick Publications, close paren, and then the duplication will go away. Okay. But I kind of like do that every now and again. I'll run the duplication feature, and sometimes it'll be that I accidentally put a duplicate in the collection and I take that out. But more often than not, it's just because something's getting flagged as a false positive on the duplication thing, and then I fix it.
Yeah, a lot of overlap with titles over the years. So yeah that can happen.
Yeah.
So what about, have you ever, you mentioned you've been collecting since, 1970. Have you ever really taken a break where you didn't collect or you didn't buy new issues? Did you? Because I know a lot of collectors, and I was one, I stepped away for, life happens. Like you said, your brothers were going off to college and they got out of the hobby. But what about yourself?
I never stopped reading altogether. In the 90s, I really ramped back my Marvel and DC a lot, but there was a lot of great stuff. I mean, I was reading Sandman. I was reading, there was a lot of indie books that I was reading in the 90s that were, I was still reading these things. So I never completely walked away. One of the things that caused me to do is like when I went in the early 90s, I got my master's degree in computer science. And what I was working on, I had one kid at the time, and I was going back to school working on a master's degree, and I was working full time. So I didn't have a tremendous amount of time on my hands. So I kept buying the things. I mean, I was reading some of the indie books, and I kept buying books, and I didn't read them. It was like about a 4 or 5 year period where I was buying like superhero books and I wasn't reading them. And then when I graduated, like I picked up and I started reading X-Men, and I was like, what in the hell is going on in this book? I had no idea. And then I went back and I'm like reading these issues and I'm like, what? This is really convoluted. And it's like, if you're reading it like as it's going along and you're a teenager, you're like, this is awesome. I'm like 30 or something, and I'm like reading this. I'm like, what a bunch of shit this is. No desire.
Perspective, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I just stopped reading X-Men, and I stopped, like everyone had a leather jacket in the Avengers. And it's like the team was like Dr. Druid and Cersei and the Black Knight or something. I'm like, what the hell are these? No, I don't need to read this anymore. So Spider-Man is a clone of somebody. It's Ben Parker, right? It's like, I don't care. So I stopped reading a lot of that stuff, but I was still reading lots of other things. Like I do think there was a lot of great stuff. That was like the 90s were like prime time for Vertigo over at DC. I mean, there was a lot of stuff I was really digging coming out of Vertigo, Hellblazer and Swamp Thing and Sandman and lots of other things. And then like those chained on to other things that I started enjoying. Like in the late 90s, Jimmy Palmiotti and Joe Quesada revitalized Marvel with that Marvel Knights kind of reboot. And they brought in Kevin Smith doing Daredevil, and they kind of rebooted Black Widow and all these kind of street level heroes and stuff. And so I jumped back onto the Marvel books at that point and was loving it. And then DC started doing some similar stuff. They had like Starman coming out by James Robinson and like a lot of other series that were coming out that were just really interesting to me. So then I just started getting back into those, and Image was really like starting to after the night. I mean, they started somewhat in the 90s, but like in the 90s there was a lot of Image stuff that was kind of just people doing more like kind of clones of Liefeld and McFarlane and like the Image founders, like just kind of more of that kind of stuff, which were kind of more superheroes, but we're edgier because we've got lots of pockets and guns and, you know, a lot more hash marks in our art and things like this. So that wasn't, but then like in a little later, Image started really branching out and doing lots of really interesting, different kinds of things that I found very intriguing. And I started reading more and more of that and more Dark Horse. And I mean,
Dark Horse, right? Yeah.
I have stuff from, I guess my collection, I have like, it's funny because if I look at my app, I can pull up my phone here and pull up the CLZ app, and it tells me things about my collection that just off of the top of it, it's kind of like, okay, I have the 122,159 comics, but that's in how many series? It used to be on here. I'm not figuring out how to get it, but it's like it's close to 2,000 different series.
Okay. Yeah, it kind of gives you a summary then, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So, old man, yes, Ghost Rider. I loved Ghost Rider in the 70s. He was one of the kind of fringe supernatural characters I read in the 70s. I loved. I'm amazed that Marvel got away with. I mean, Marvel published stuff in the 70s that you could never publish today with the religious, I guess, extremism that exists and politicization of, like, they had The Son of Satan was a comic I was reading as a 12-year-old. I would buy it at 7-Eleven, and the dude was the son of Satan. He had a big pentagram on his chest and he did exorcisms and fought demons. I mean, he was a good guy. He wasn't working for Satan. He was rebelling against his dad. But it was the son of Satan.
Right.
You know, Ghost Rider.
If a 10-year-old bought that at a convenience store today, it'd be all over the news.
Amazing, right? And it's like Ghost Rider. The dude sold his soul to the Satan, you know, to save Crash Simpson. And then Satan just is, because it's his way, you know, because Crash Simpson, I read the beginning of Ghost Rider. Crash Simpson, Johnny Blaze's mentor, had cancer. And Satan, you save him so he doesn't die of cancer. And Satan, oh, I'm going to save him from cancer. Then he has him crash his motorcycle and die from the crash. It's like, well, he didn't die of cancer. You lose. I have your soul. You know, it's like, that's the way the devil is. Don't sell your soul to the devil, kids. I mean, that's the message I took out of it anyway. It's like, the good guys were objectively good, right? The Son of Satan was cool, but then in the 90s, they kind of redid super extra darker versions of all these characters that I was not as much of a fan of. Son of Satan became Hellstorm, and he was still Damon Hellstrom, but he was just much crazier. There was a really good Warren Ellis series with Hellstorm, though, that was very dark. But it was just kind of like, you know, the 70s stuff was 70s dark, right? It had,
different dark, right?
The 90s and 2000s dark was Vertigo dark. There was some dark stuff going on. Have you ever read Miracle Man?
I've recently picked up the new series, but I've never read any of the old.
So Miracle Man in the 90s. This was another one, late 80s, early 90s. It came out from Eclipse. So it was a reboot of a British superhero called Marvel Man, who was like a total ripoff of Captain Marvel. He would say Komoda, which was atomic spelled backwards, right? To change into Marvel Man.
Okay.
So he was basically Captain Marvel, and there was young Marvel Man and there was girl Marvel. It was a total ripoff of Captain Marvel. So when they made him in the 80s, 90s, they couldn't call him Marvel Man because of Marvel Comics would have sued their butt, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Because you couldn't call Captain Marvel anymore. You know, at that point, they were calling it Shazam because of trademark and stuff. So they called him Miracle Man. That run, written by Alan Moore, is amazing. It was finished up. They never totally finished, but Neil Gaiman took it over the last 5 or 6 issues. There is some supremely dark stuff going on, like Swamp Thing level dark, like from like the Alan Moore Swamp Thing. But like I won't describe it. If you want to read a really great thing, read, because it's in trade paperback now from Marvel, because it was out of print for a long time, but then Marvel got sold or bartered or whatever to Marvel, and Marvel has it now. So I think they like renamed it back to Marvel Man because Marvel has it.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And
You can do that.
they can reprint that stuff, and it is awesome. Really good.
I'll have to look for that in the trade paperback then. Yeah. What about, we're talking no big break in collecting
Nope.
for 50 years. How have you handled, the budget aspect of it? With having such a large collection now.
I've been lucky. I had a really good job. I mean, I got like a computer science degree in 1985. I got a master's degree in like 94, I think. And I've had really good jobs in the tech field that paid really well. So it's never been I'm not spending, I'm not buying $10,000 comics or anything like that, but I don't have a problem buying, a bunch of new comics each month. I mean, I get a discount too because I buy a lot of comics.
Right.
So
Sure.
someone asked about homeowners insurance. You
well,
do not want to
for your
use
collection, right?
You do not want to use homeowners insurance. First off, horror stories abound of like homeowners policies, even if they say that it's a collectibles policy, not wanting to pay off like actual replacement value of collectibles. So you need to get specific collectibles insurance. And there are a number of companies out there that do collectibles insurance. So you just kind of look around and find one that you like what they're saying. I have a policy with a place called Collectibles Insurance Services, and I've seen the testimonials, and they've convinced me that they're a good place. I mean, I don't have to like I'm kind of a special case. I'm not like your regular guy, right? Because I have the Guinness World Record, and
right. Yeah, and your collection's a little bit larger probably than most, right?
Look, I have pictures of this stuff online. You see in the background there and all this stuff, right?
Probably another good reason to have that database up to date, right?
Yeah. It's just like, so, I mean, it's just like when I got my insurance policy, they wanted to talk to my local comic shop. They talked to mycomicshop.com, who I had bought a lot of comic books from over the years. It's just like they talked to, at the time, the guy who ran Comic Base about my database and how I cataloged my stuff. So, I mean, they did their homework, but then also it's like, hey, I've got a documented collection that's got all this stuff in it. I'm not pulling your leg. I actually have this stuff.
Right.
So for me,
look at it if you want.
It's a little easier than some other people. But in general, I would recommend, it's like you absolutely want to get insurance that's tailored for collectibles. You want a replacement value policy, right? That will pay to replace the item, not like what you paid for it, because most of this stuff appreciates in value, right? And keep really good records of what's in your collection. I mean, that's the bottom line. I mean, I don't obsess about what the value of stuff is because the value of stuff changes every week. I mean, it's just like some errant article comes out in Hollywood Reporter and like the values of like a whole bunch of stuff jump up, and then they might go down again some other point.
Right. TV and TV, movie speculation, rumors. Yeah.
So the only time it really matters is if you're filing a claim. And then it's just going to matter of like, what do I have? What grade is it in? What's the story? And, it's even mine. It's just like, I don't have, like, if you looked at my database, it's not like I'm claiming I've got 9.8 versions of like every single comic in my collection. It's like my Spider-Man 1's a 4.0, it's not a, So how does Bob feel about graded comics?
And that was
I
one of the
am
questions
not
I was
a
going to ask you about. What is the bulk of your collection? My sense is that most of your books are raw books and not
they are.
slabbed or graded.
I am not a fan of, I mean, I can see the point of slabbing a comic if you want to sell it, right? Because just the way that the market is, it'll sell for a lot more. Now, that said, I notice that people get all wrapped up in, ooh, look how much this comic is worth. And like when they're new comics, especially for like these hot comics, right? Those are slabbed 9.8s, right? Not every comic is going to get a 9.8. Most of these people, they send it in, they get it cleaned and pressed. They send it in and try to get the 9.8. I know a guy who like flips comics and he buys stuff to flip and he pays the CGC, which is like all a scam for CGC to make money. But you know, they provide a service where it's like if it's not going to gray out as a 9.8, they won't slab it, and they charge a $10 or $15 fee to like pre-screen it and look at
Right,
it and say,
right.
oh, that one's going to be a 9.6, so therefore it's worthless, right? It's just like, really? A 9.6 is worthless? Like most of my collection is 9.2 or 9.4. I would call it, you know, I don't call something a 9.8, you know, because it's not slabbed. And I'm not, it just, and that's the other thing. It's like, unless something's going to sell for a couple of $100s, but unless you like make a business of like sending in like tons of stuff, it costs, you know, like they have volume discounts and like the people who really do it are getting better prices, but it's something like what, like 25 or $30 to get a book slabbed,
Yeah, and then between shipping
and then you
and
have to pay for shipping there and
right,
you got to pay shipping back, so that's like
right,
another $30 or
right,
something,
and then
right?
the time away, right? If you're looking to do a
Right.
flip,
So
it could take you
so
6 months to get a book graded.
you're into a book for like 50 or $60 to get it graded and shipped back and forth and all this kind of stuff. So if it's not, I mean, that makes complete, if you have Werewolf by Night 32 that's hot right now because it's the first Moon Night and it's going for thousands of dollars, if you want to sell that, get it slabbed because it's going to sell for significantly more if it's slabbed, right? Pay the expedited fee. You know, it's like like $150, so you don't have to wait 6 months to get it back, right? But you're going to sell it for thousands of dollars, so that makes sense. I wouldn't get something slabbed just to have it sitting around in my collection. I put them in nice mylar bags with, you know, like the older stuff. They're in like nice mylar with the acid-free backing boards that you buy, and they're perfectly fine, you know. And for like regular stuff, they're in poly bags. And like the mylar people, they would have you believe that putting your comic in a regular poly bag is like unto wrapping it in a tissue and setting it out in the rain. And I can tell you that this is not the case. I have comics. So one of the things that I do, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but there's these massive books that Taschen puts out, like, you know, the hit Marvel Age of Comics, 50
Oh yeah,
years of
yeah,
DC and stuff. So I like they got a hold of me way back when because I had the Guinness record. So the guy who's the art designer on those would send me lists of comics they want to take pictures of to put in those books. So if you look in the back of almost any one of those Taschen books that have to do with comics, Silver Age and forward. I don't have Golden Age books. I don't have all kinds of original EC books or anything, but you know, Bronze Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, you know, Modern Age stuff. I've got most of that stuff. So you look in the credits in the back of those books and it say most of the books in this correct, you know, this book were taken from the collection of Bob Bretall, and my name's in the credit of those books. So as a result, they would ask me, "Hey, can we have your Avengers #1? Can we have your Spider-Man #1? Can we have your Spider-Man 1 through 10?" You know, because they're actually doing a project that isn't out yet, but they wanted like the first 20 issues of Spider-Man from me. Um, so I gave them to them. I mean, they insure them. They have insurance. We put like the estimate. You know, like I have the grade, what they're selling for, and it's like all this. One time they actually did accidentally screw up one of my comics, and they no problem, replaced it. They
Oh,
got
okay.
me a CG seed, thing that it is like bought it, that find an auction, we'll buy it for you. And it was Amazing Spider-Man 121.
Okay.
And they just bought me a new one, like
Well, that's good.
$600 at the time, And they said, "Oh, keep the other one. we don't have any need for it." They just like accidentally creased the cover when they were handling it.
Okay.
But anyway, I mean, they're really good. But the rambling story ends up in I have pulled books out of my collection that are in regular poly bags with regular backing boards that were 40 years old and hadn't been taken out of a long box in 40 years. And they're in the same shape that they were in when they went into those bags and boards 40 years ago. These are not like all deteriorated. They're not wrecked up. They're not like, and it's just like, it has to do with storage too. Cause I live in California. I don't have like, it's not high humidity. I don't have
Right.
like,
Right.
I don't have an incredibly hostile environment that I'm storing these things in. I store them fairly decently, And like I said, poly bags, 40 years old. I mean, from like literally the 80s, right? They're fine. you know,
Well,
some
that's
of them
good.
were
That's
like
good.
the
That's good
poly
to
was
know.
like a little weighty on it. Like a few of them, not all of them, but some of them, the poly was a little weighty. So when I put them, I rebagged those. But I mean, it's just like other people are like, "Oh, poly bags are only good for temporary storage and you got to replace them every 10 years." And I'm like, no, you don't.
You've got
People
the
who
proof,
sell
right?
the bags and boards want you to maybe believe that. And it's like, hey, Mylar's really nice. I have a lot of Mylar, but Mylar is also really expensive. And like most of my books are dollar bin books. It's like, what do I want to put a dollar book into a Mylar that costs $1? It's just
Yeah.
like, that
Yeah.
makes
No, it
no
doesn't make
sense.
sense.
So, bags and boards, yes, absolutely use bags and boards. I mean, it's just like, there's all kinds of reasons to use bags and boards, and they do protect books. I mean, like I've got some old books that weren't in bags and boards, and they do look degraded, right? But then I've got old books that are in just the regular poly bags, and they're fine. So take from that what you will. It's always better to use better. I won't tell someone don't use Mylar. Mylar is great, but I will also say you probably don't need to use 4mm Mylar and like make things like completely like kill a zombie with the thing. It's just like overkill. I have like the 2mm Mylights, and those work fine. The Mylights and halfbacks, they're great. Like
Well,
cheaper.
it's good to know, right? Because I know, yeah, I've heard that a number of, oh, you got to swap out your bags and boards every, periodically, 7 to 10 years or whatever it may be. Yeah. So
Another advantage, I don't know if you looked at, like, there's some Mylars that are open on the top. They don't have a flap that folds over. I don't know why someone would use those. It's just like, if I'm not going to have a flap closing the thing in, um, somebody
yeah, I think
spills
you
a
would,
soda
right? You
on
would
the
want
box
that.
and it like goes right into the, it's like, I mean, what is the point of that? A bug can crawl right in. I mean, a bug is not going to chew through 2mm Mylar. Maybe a really determined bug will, but I mean, if you've got like the flap on a 2mm Mylar, to me, that's way better than a 4mm Mylar that's like open. Or what else are you going to do? Are you like putting a 2mm Mylar into a 4mm Mylar or something? I mean, it's like, what in the world are you doing with these things? I don't understand why someone would use an open-ended Mylar. That's just
Right.
me.
No. Yeah, that wouldn't make sense. Looking at old man's comment here.
Yeah. Oriented polypropylene. They're probably thicker poly, but they're not Mylar, because Mylar is not polypropylene. Mylar's got a different name for it. The difference is that poly will actually degrade when subjected to certain extremes of temperature or other kinds of things, and the Mylar won't. Theoretically, it's like archival and is much more stable. than the polypropylene. So I don't know.
But I think, as you mentioned, right, certain
But as
climate
you, yeah,
control
if
is
you're
important.
doing good with your stuff, like don't put them in an attic, right?
Right.
It's like attic, really bad place. Attics get really hot, it's just the way they are. I have mine in my garage, but my garage is literally under my feet. I'm in my bonus room that sits over my garage. So my garage, like a lot of people, they have a garage where it's just like a roof and then it's the outside. So like on a hot
Right.
day, the sun's beating directly onto this, and it's usually garages are not insulated. They don't have insulated walls. They don't have an insulated roof, and they get really, really hot. My garage is finished. It has insulation in the walls. It's got an insulated double wall door. No windows in it. So no light gets in.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And there's like this entire room sitting above it that provides a buffer. So it really doesn't get hot in my garage. So it's like perfectly fine for storage.
No, that's good. Yeah, no, I know. Obviously, that's important, right? The climate, humidity here on the East Coast, you got to be careful with, with
Yes.
books and people storing in basements where it's very, can be very damp, or you can
I
have water
worry
damage.
about,
So yeah,
I would be really worried, if I had a basement, because basements can flood, right? Um, and the heat, as old man points out,
oh yeah,
that
attic.
that's like the acid in the papers. I mean, that's when you get like the really bad browning and they get brittle and stuff. That's heat damage, and like moisture, like can get them to be wavy. They can get mold. You
Oh
know,
sure.
that's another thing. If you're in a moist environment and they're not kind of sealed down tight, you can get mold damage. You can get rust. The staples will rust.
Oh, right.
There's like all kinds of things that can happen,
Yeah.
which I don't have a problem with here because it doesn't really get particularly humid here. Not like, I mean, it's not like Colorado, where it's like really low humidity to the point like your nasal tract. I've always had problems when I'm in Colorado where it's just like, it's too dry. So that's like the ideal sort of situation at Colorado. But here it's like, it's not humid to the point where it's like damaging. So
Right. So what about your website? I know you have a comic spectrum website that you. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
yeah, it's not something that, I mean, when I started it, I tried to put a lot more stuff on it. Like I tried to
There it
put
is.
news articles on it, and it's just like, boy, I was spending so much time, and it's like I can't keep up with like all the professional news websites that are like getting all the press releases and putting them up, and they've got all kinds of people working for them now, and so I just gave up on that. It's like it's kind of a collector's resource, I guess, at this point, where it's like I have these comic collecting tips like I've been talking about here. I've got articles on there about slabbing. I've got that I didn't write all, I wrote some of it, but I have a buddy who like is really hardcore into slabbing books.
Okay.
And so I've got a blog on there that talks all about slabbing books and from his, and he's got like pictures of stuff, and it's like, oh yeah, I sent this in and I got this grade back and I got this difference. And it's just like the other thing it points out is these guys aren't perfect because look at what this is on this one, and they're calling it this grade and it shouldn't be, but I got stuff about the bags and boards and boxes. I've got stuff about variant covers. I've got a whole section on there about collecting original art and framing original art. um,
Yeah, that's
I
a big part of your collection too, right?
I
Some original
collected
art.
original art for a long time, and I've been priced out of that market
No.
completely. It's just like now, it's just like I'm glad I got a lot of my old books because I've been kind of priced out of like I'm never going to get that last 10 or 12 Marvel books at this point. It's just like the ones I don't have, I'm just not going to have because I'm not going to pay $10,000 a piece for these things. So, but like original art, I used to be able to pick up original art at conventions and stuff and directly from the artist relatively cheap. And boy, it's so expensive now for everything. So it's just like but I have a lot, so I'm happy. but I just don't buy it as much. But I mean, the tips I have are just like they're valid. It's just now everything's exponentially more expensive, But I talk about like the different kinds. You got covers, you got splash pages, half splashes, story pages, and the different prices and sketches, and kind of how to go about doing that kind of stuff. And I've got my own, which I never finished. I got to get back to doing it. I have a brief history of comics where I got to like all the ages, my take on what comic book ages are, and it's like everybody's got almost their own opinion on it. But I have like the platinum age and the golden age and atomic
That's what I
age
always wonder, right? Like the
between.
modern age right now has been going on for what, 30 years? Like when are
Yeah,
what's the next
that's
phase?
the stuff I don't have worked out. It's like because there's certain things because I like have some epics in there, that are like kind of, because I have like because there's different era. I call them eras, I think, because you had the things that ran in parallel to the ages that were like different, right? Because you had like the underground stuff, right? And then
Sure.
you had like that indie era where like all that indie stuff came up, and that came after the underground, and you could see a connection, but like the indie stuff like really grew, and it was like kind of separate from. You don't really have Bronze Age indie and modern age indie. It's just like it's kind of a separate thing that kind of runs in parallel to the main thing. Yeah, the pouch era, the '90s. It's just like it's funny because the DC history they do call like the '80s and forward. They call it the Dark Age because everything got kind of dark with like when Dark Knight Returns came in and Watchmen and all that kind of stuff. But Marvel definitely had the leather jacket pouches and immense guns era of the '90s. That was something to see. But then there was like even the resurgence of indie comics. Like, I'm kind of spitballing some of this stuff. I have to get back to it. I kind of like brought it up to about the '80s, I think, and then kind of like ran out of steam on it.
Okay.
But anyway, like if you go to the site, I got pictures of my comic room that I need to put some new ones up because they're like from a few years ago. But it's just I've got to you can send me questions, I'll answer them if I can. But
Okay.
in general, I just try to make it a resource of stuff. I'm not trying to be it's like it kind of is what it is. Like, I'm not trying to compete with someone because I'm not selling anything.
Right.
I'm not selling.
You don't have a
I
team of writers
explicitly,
and
yeah, I don't do ads. I've asked people, it's like, hey, can you want to advertise this? We'll pay you, X amount. And I'm like, nope, I don't want to endorse. I will endorse something if I like it.
Sure.
If I read it and I liked it, and I used to do more comic reviews. I don't do as many detailed reviews as I used to because it just takes time. It's like if I want to write a decent comic review, it takes me a half an hour or something. And then I have to format it into WordPress and get it up on the site and everything. And it's like any comic review I do, it took me an hour. It was like I could have read 6 to 8 comic books in that hour, and I'd kind of like rather read the 6 or 8 comics. And so now it's like if I do something, I have a Facebook page that's Comic Spectrum also, just one word, Comic Spectrum. There's a link to it from the website, but it's like on the Comic Spectrum page. If I buy an old comic that I think is interesting or cool, I'll put a picture of it up and say some stuff about it, or like I'll just, if I see some article that like particularly intrigues me, like when Marvel decided to ditch Diamond.
Oh yeah.
They're going to Penguin Random House starting in November, right?
And there's a lot of rumblings now with Penguin too now, with some shipping and some issues going on out there.
It's just like nothing's perfect. You're going to go to one, you're going to go to the other. But you get less of a discount if you're staying with Diamond with Marvel. But then DC, they went to DCBS, Lunar Distributors they call
Lunar,
it, but it's a spin-off of DCBS. And the other one that was existent for a while that like has given up was run by Midtown Comics. So they originally had like DCBS doing the Western U.S., Midtown Comics doing the Eastern U.S. For DC.
Oh, I didn't
and
know
that had like all kinds of growing pains. I kind of like keep abreast of all that crazy stuff. I'm like, I like keep into like all this kind of stuff. I got like a lot of stuff bouncing around in my head about comics. A lot of
So
inside baseball.
are you aware of the big community on YouTube of all the comic book
I
channels and
am. There's
okay.
so many of them. I just
Yes.
don't have time. Same
Yes.
reason I don't write reviews. It's just like I find that I could like sit and watch like comic book podcasts like all day long. I think they're great. I mean, for like they're free, right? I mean, I could sit and
Oh
watch
yeah.
people
Yep.
talk about
Yeah.
comics, and it's like this is amazing, this is fascinating, and it doesn't cost me a dime. And hopefully, maybe they're getting some ad revenue off it. Doesn't matter to me. It doesn't really cost me a whole lot or anything. Just the time.
Right. Right.
And you know, if I wanted to spend that time immersing myself in that, I think it's great. I have so many other things I got to do.
Right. Yeah, no, there are a number of channels do reviews, so they'll do
Yeah.
weekly comic reviews or a review of a series. So it is nice to be able to be able to search for a particular review or topic and find it, and
Yes.
you can watch 5-10 minutes of video and
Yes.
get a good review, or you can read it too on a website.
Yeah. I admin a Facebook group called the Comic Book Review Club, and
Okay.
there's a group of people on there that like post their reviews of comics. Link to either their website where it's a written review, or they link to a YouTube or whatever site where it's like a video review. But it's one of the things that I like have to just I spend time every day squashing posts because it's no selling, no Kickstarters, no begging for money, no doing
Right,
this
right,
or that. It's comic book review club. The only thing you can post is reviews of comics. So people post other stuff all the time and I just zap it left and
right.
right. But I get to see, so I do actually see lots of different comic reviews and stuff that post on there, and comment on them and stuff, because it's interesting. I like to keep my hand in. Although there's a couple of guys on there that like they review like all kinds of stuff that I have zero interest in. But it's like it's fascinating to see them. Like they're like one guy like really likes Zenoscope books, and I've just never really gotten into Zenoscope that much at all.
Now, is that linked on your website, that comic review, or is that not?
It's not because
Okay.
I actually probably should, but it's just called, if you say comic book review club, I think it's all separate words
Okay.
on Facebook. You'll find it.
Okay.
Um, and you have to answer some questions to get into it, which are like,
Yeah,
you
just a few
realize,
screening questions, right?
please
Yeah.
acknowledge that that you're not supposed to sell stuff on this group and post things. And then immediately people will join the group and come in and post their Kickstarter. And I just like,
Right. Yeah. See ya.
because it's like cool, there's plenty of groups for that. There's all kinds of sell, like if you want to buy comics, there's groups,
Oh yeah, there's plenty of
for
groups on
selling
Facebook. Oh, yeah.
comics, there's groups for buying comics, there's groups for talking about your Kickstarter, there's like general interest things. So just
Yeah.
like same thing with my website. It's like I try not to replicate something that already exists. I don't want to do like a kind of half as good version of something that 20 other people are doing. So
Yeah,
this
you want
one,
to try
it's
to
like
add value, right? Yeah.
it's just reviews, and it's like since everybody's going to review something different, kind of by definition, it's just like it is what it is. If you want to see a bunch of people review and talk about things, there's a guy posting up a video about the Carnage, because now there's a lot of Venom and Carnage stuff on there right
Oh,
now.
sure. Yeah.
The movie came out a week ago, so it's just like Venom, Carnage, Venom, Um, and Taylor, yes, you are able to link video reviews in the group. The only thing that I ask people to do is in the post that you put up on the group is say the series and issue number that you're reviewing, that you're talking about, so someone can look at it and see what it is that's being reviewed. So don't just go in and put a YouTube link and that's all. So just like write a Facebook post that says, here's my review of, Carnage first appearance, or here's my review of the Maximum Carnage crossover that just happened at Marvel. or something like that. Just some, it's like not, doesn't have to follow some specific format, but you're just trying to give people an idea of what you're reviewing. And then you put a link to a video, and I don't watch every one of them. So if you subsequently in your video are trying to sell something, okay. Someone that's let the buyer beware on someone who clicks through onto some link. But I try to at least keep the posts honest on the group.
Yeah, no, most of the YouTube community does, pretty just straight, honest reviews. So Taylor does, some good. He has a good perspective, a unique perspective. So he does.
I like the passion that people have. I mean, that's why I like I'll read. I have some will say I have a very low bar, and it's true. And it's I like a tremendous amount of things. I mean, I don't like everything, but I like just being on the internet and going on Facebook and Instagram. I seem to like a lot more stuff than most people. There's a lot of stuff that I like, and it's like movies and TV shows and everything. It's just there's always somebody getting worked up about something, and it's right. I watched that and I didn't think it was that bad. I mean, it wasn't the greatest thing I ever saw, or it wasn't the greatest comic I ever wrote, but it wasn't like an utter piece of garbage either. It was let me show you some actual utter piece of garbage so you have a point of comparison for future, kind of thing I feel like telling people sometimes. But even those, I'll read some the distinction between indie comics and small press comics. You kind of familiar with that?
No, I don't think I am.
Small press is the stuff that you'll see people selling at a convention that doesn't have any major publisher, and it's they're kind of they print it themselves, and they're selling it, right. And there'll be some that are just little black and white, mini comics or something, so that's small press. It's just and even that, a lot of times they're really crude, right? But I can look at that and it's you see the passion that the person creating it has, and you can kind of see the story they're trying to tell, and sometimes they're coming utterly short, of hitting the mark on telling this story, but they really tried. So I'll give them points for that. It's just I get lots of weird comics. My method for buying comics is if I see some comic that I don't have, that I've never seen before, my favorite thing is going through a 50-cent or dollar bin and seeing a comic and what the heck is this? I have never seen this in my life, and I will buy it. It's all I need for me to buy a book is for it to cost $1 or less, and I've never seen it before. And then I will buy it and I'll read it, and it's most of them are somewhere between, wow, somebody made that. And that was okay, but then every now and again, there'll be something that's wow, that was amazing. It's how did this person never end up doing more? And it's just because nobody ever heard of it and it never got the audience, But it does give me I have a pretty wide perspective on comics, because I've got the 100, I've read, again, I've got 129,000 comics. I'd say I probably read about 125,000 comics. So I just answered you, Taylor. So most of them. So it's just I have a lot of point of comparison. And I think that's why a lot of things that somebody looks at and say, wow, that's the worst comic book I ever read. And it's that could very well be the case, but you've only read 500 comic books.
Right.
I've read 125,000 comic books, and that is far from the worst comic book I've ever read.
So what about all of the recent movies and TV series and streaming service series, all of the adaptations from comic books? What's your thoughts on those?
I will see pretty much anything that I have access to, right? But I don't have everything. I have Netflix, I have Amazon, and I have Disney Plus. Okay. And I only got Disney Plus because of all the Marvel stuff.
Oh, okay.
Right. So I don't have Hulu. I don't have HBO Max. It's like all that kind of stuff. So I haven't seen everything. But what I do have is I have what's called the AMC A list. So AMC theaters, which are most of the US, right?
Oh yeah.
It's like $25 a month. I can see 3 movies a week in any of their theaters on any of their screens. So I go to see 8 to 10 movies a month in the theater. Now, they're not all comic book movies. In the last month, I saw Venom and I saw Shang-Chi, but I also saw The Many Saints of Newark, which is a Sopranos prequel. I saw a French movie called Titan. I saw Blue Bayou, which was about immigration and like how this kid gets adopted from Korea, and his parents didn't fill out the right paperwork. So as an adult, he gets picked up by the cops and they go to deport. ICE wants to deport him because he's not a citizen and he's lived here since he's 3. You know, and it's just like I was an amazing. It wasn't acted as well as it could have been. Now it was actually no, it was acted really well, but there was some holes in the writing. I thought there was an action movie called Cop Shop that had Gerard Butler in it. That was amazing. That was a great movie. Malignant was a horror movie, really crazy horror movie. The Card Counter had Oscar Isaac, who's going to be playing Moon Knight. I saw The Night House, which was another sort of horror movie. Could have been more horror. It was kind of a okay movie, but like I said, I saw Dear Evan Hansen musical. You know, I've seen 10 movies in the last month in the theater. So that takes time. I love movies though, and I watch movies on Turner Classic Movies. They had they showed all the Clint Eastwood Man with No Name movies a week or so ago. So I recorded all those and watched them again. So, you know,
Taylor wants to know what's the worst book you've ever read.
I don't even know off the top of my head. Probably some wacky indie book. I almost guarantee it was like a black and white indie book from the 80s or 90s when they were like cranking out like just tons of comics to like capitalize on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You know, I don't really know like the preteen Dirty Jean Kung Fu Kangaroos. Did you ever hear of that one? There was the adolescent radioactive black belt hamsters.
Oh, that I do remember. Yes.
Not super high quality comics going on there. There was some other stuff like that, you know, just like, I mean, I'm sure the worst stuff I've ever, I can tell you the worst stuff I ever read is absolutely not from the big leagues. It was not a Marvel or a DC book. There are lots of, I mean, not to say that every Marvel or DC book is a gem by any means, but I mean, there's a certain bar that you have to hit to be published by Marvel. And Boris the Bear was actually not that bad. I remember Boris the Bear, and I liked Boris the Bear. Boris the Bear I would put above some of the stuff that Marvel and DC publish. Not every issue, but like at least the early issues of that book were decent. But like I said, I've read that. It's just like, but there's a lot of stuff that came out. So I mean, there's crazy stuff. I mean, I pick up stuff like I can show you like just got a box of stuff today that was crazy stuff that I had never read before. Packin's Land. I'm not expecting this to be a gem, right? But I'll read it. Mezzo. I have no idea what this is, but the cover looks pretty awesome. Where am I going on my camera? There we go. Got the glare.
Yeah, a good cover.
It's like $2, you know. It's like, okay, and it's like this one. New Zodiac. Well, I have no idea what this is going to be like, but looked interesting.
The price was right?
Yeah, it was a couple of bucks, you know, like Nightlife. You know, I have a couple of other issues of this series. And it's like let me pull this one out. Let's look inside. See what we got. Well, it's not, I mean, this is This is what I would call not the greatest art, but it's kind of stylistic. It's not terrible. It's not getting the anatomy like completely wrong. There's not like,
Right.
I think that it suffers from like a complete lack of backgrounds. It doesn't give it like a sense of place. That would be something I would write in a review, right? Of something. Here they kind of like make an attempt at doing some backgrounds, and I'll have to read the story to see what I think of the story. And it could be that the story is like way better than the art. That's the case in a
Could
lot
be.
of these. Sometimes the art's way better than the story. Sometimes they mesh with one another. But like again, it's like I see some cheap comic that I haven't got. I'll give it a shot. You know, I'm kind of equal opportunity on a lot of this stuff.
Well, Bob, I think you answered all of my questions. Is there anything else that you know wanted to mention or cover
Uh,
before we wrap up?
no, I mean, feel free. You know, if you ever want to have me back on and talk about some particular topic, I, like you can kind of tell, I kind of try to keep on top of most things. I can talk about most eras of comics. I can talk about creators. I can talk about kind of like behind the scenes stuff. I used to do like when I did a podcast back in the early days of podcast called the Comic Book Page with a guy named John Mayo. He still does the show. We did
Okay.
over 300 episodes of that podcast back. I think I left it like 10 years ago. But we did a lot, and I did a lot of creator interviews um, where I met and interviewed a lot of creators
Oh well.
when they were just starting out. You know, I interviewed Tom King when he was not Tom King, you know, it was like Scott Snyder, you know, like when they were doing indie books.
No. Okay.
And they would talk to someone like me. Like once I started working for DC, it'd be like, I can't really say anything unless you clear it with DC marketing. And well, it's kind of
Yeah,
pointless to talk
Scott
to you in
Scott
that
Snyder
case.
actually lives local. He actually goes to the same LCS that I do, and I actually tried to get him to do an interview, but he's not available now.
Yeah, it's hard to get. I mean, it's real easy to get up and coming creators, and it's fascinating to talk to them. You know, I like talking to creators, and it's like I've been going to the San Diego Comic Con every year since 1990. So it's like I I do comic books there. Like that's a very misunderstood comic convention
Yeah.
because the outside looking in, people think that it's like, oh, there's no comics at Comic Con, and people are always saying that, and there's nothing could be farther from the truth. There are more comic books at San Diego Comic Con than any other two or three comic books combined, comic book
Yeah.
conventions combined.
Okay.
It's just you have to look for them because the way San Diego's set up, it's like 20 different conventions. It's just like if you want to go there for cosplay, there's tons of
Right.
cosplay. If you
Right.
want to just see Hollywood actors and movies and TV shows, there's a ton of that. You know, it's just like all these things exist. If you just want exclusive toys, there's all these things there, and every one of those things has got a huge line of people waiting for it. For me, I walk into a room and Terry Moore is doing a panel, and there's like 20 or 30 of us in the room, and we can directly ask Terry questions and sit there and chat with him for an hour. You know, I've gone to the Daniel Clowes. I don't know if you know Daniel Clowes. He did Eight Ball. It's a
Okay.
really
Yeah.
significant indie book, and some others like Lloyd Llewellyn and things like that. I mean, he did an awesome panel one year. Jim Steranko, interestingly, had a panel, and there were only about 50 people in the room.
Oh wow.
You
Okay.
know, it's just
Yeah.
like
So
I can go to a comic book panel constantly all day long and never do anything else and never see a single thing that has to do with Hollywood at all. And I can go down on the floor and there's Artist Alley and there's just like tons of creators there and there's all the comic book publishers and I can talk to people at the publishing booths. It's not as easy to get up to Marvel and DC, but I can like walk up to the people at Boom Studios and talk to them,
right. Right.
Dark Horse, same way, it's just, there's lots of things that you can do there and it's all about comics. And I
Yeah. Well,
love it.
New York City Comic Con is next week. I've been a few times to New York City. But the times that I were there, I wasn't collecting. I was kind of on a hiatus from collecting, so I really didn't take opportunity, the full opportunity to see the comics and the creators at the time. So I
Yeah.
hope to
I've
get.
never
I'm not
been to the
going
New
this year,
York
but
one.
hope to go back next year.
The one thing I can say about the New York Con is that because I've seen the schedule of panels, their schedule of panels, if panels are what you like, and I like panels, it pales in comparison to San Diego. And I think another part of it is that Reed Pop that runs that, they're running a for-profit con. So
Oh, sure.
they
Yeah.
want to do stuff that's going to make money. So it's just like they're not going to devote space to something that 30 people are interested in.
Right.
Whereas San Diego's a nonprofit. And as much as you say about those guys, it's just like if there's Terry Moore who's got a couple of hundred comics out, if he's willing to do a panel, they don't care if only 30 people come to it. They'll give him a panel, and those 30 of us who love his work that are at the con get to sit and talk to Terry Moore for an hour.
Well, yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that San Diego was a nonprofit. Yeah.
Yeah,
Or
and
not for profit.
they run WonderCon as well, which is in Anaheim,
Okay.
across the street from Disneyland at the Anaheim Convention Center. That actually is kind of a mini version of San Diego in that it's like San Diego was 10 or 15 years ago before San Diego got like completely insane, because they don't have all the Hollywood booths and all the video games and
Right.
all that kind of stuff at WonderCon. So WonderCon's an awesome convention to go to as well.
Yeah, because I think San Diego, really all of the news that you hear out of it is all of the Hollywood, the movie stuff, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is like, I understand if you have never been and you're not talking to someone like that has done the comic book stuff there, to all intents and purposes, just looking at the news coverage of it, and it's just like you would expect 75% of the people at the con to be dressed up in a superhero costume and or standing in a line.
Right.
And that's actually not the case. It's just, those of us, it's just like you've got a particular agenda. It's like it's an awesome convention, but it's virtually impossible to get tickets to anymore. It's just like they put the tickets for sale online and they sell out in 2 hours of like 150,000 tickets. It's just like
Well, it's interesting. I think the New York City con, it still has tickets, and usually they sell out very quickly.
I think it's got to do with COVID
Yeah,
more than anything else. It's probably
yeah.
the demand, I'm sure, is like, do I really want to go into a convention center full of people, right now?
Yeah, close quarters with 30
God
other
knows
thousand
who,
people.
right?
Yeah.
So I think that they sold out like pre-COVID. They would sell out regularly.
Oh yeah, sure.
So,
all right.
But anyway, like I said, I'm happy to do that. Anyone goes onto the Facebook page, they can, message me there, or they can send me a message through my website, or, like I said, I'm happy to chat on almost any. The only topics I won't talk about in comics is I'm not the right person to talk to about what things are worth, because I just don't care.
Yeah, the speculation, the cost.
I don't. I mean, I'm aware of it. Don't get me wrong. It's like I know what's going on. So I've talked about it a little bit from an outside looking in basis, and I know the mechanics of it. And it all boils down to supply and demand. And if you want to put the effort in, it's a way to make money. I can make more money consulting. It's like,
and trying to flip books, right? Yeah,
exactly. But if you don't have 35 years of a computer science degree experience, then making that $1,000, maybe the best way to do that is like spending a lot of time researching and flipping books. And if you want to do that, more power to you.
Yeah.
I just don't want to talk about that for 2 hours. I'm happy to talk about this stuff for 2 hours. This is awesome.
Well, Bob, I really do, appreciate you coming on. It was certainly an education for me. I've learned some things. I've got some homework now. There's a couple books I got to go pick up now that based on your recommendation. So I really do, appreciate you coming on. And well, I'm looking at the clock. We've gone on almost 2 hours now. So
2 hours. So was it like 10 o'clock there, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. So,
I
but
gotta go
thank
eat
you.
some dinner.
Like I said, I really appreciate you coming on. And then, yeah, I'll include all of the links. I have your website. I'll get the Facebook page, include that in the description, and I'll send you over a copy of the links of that too. So
Yeah, awesome.
you can share it out.
I'll post it on the Facebook page.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great. I appreciate that. So, all right. Thanks, guys. Thanks,
Okay.
Bob. And thanks, everybody in the chat for joining us. Have a great night, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.